Then.
Hello, everybody. So nice to see you all again. Well, for those of you who I'm seeing again, I should say. There we go. Oops. Okay. Okay, so today we are talking about scientific and technical communication. This is part of a 5-part series, and we are at the end of the whole series, and it's been great. I've enjoyed talking about it. This is all the stuff I'm providing to you is new content that I used to do in 1 hour and now have expanded to 5 hours. So we have a lot to cover. I have put in the chat anything where you have like some sort of scientific or technical communication challenge. Just hopefully we'll have time to maybe talk about some of those at the end of the session. So we're going to talk about the role of scientific and technical information, why it's important, some tips on how to do it, and go through some resources and case studies. So first, talking about the role of communication. This is a chart that we've been using, and like I said, it really is good because we talk about the full spectrum from informing to empowering. And one sort of message, I really do want to get across is that sort of a change in philosophy that has been occurring over the past 10 years or so is to make scientific and technical information in all settings, not just community engagement, but with patients and stakeholders and so forth, much more of a two-way street as opposed to some scientific technical experts speaking on high. So this is something that's really changed, particularly during the Biden administration. They had a whole activity that talked about more public engagement in science and technology research. And so keep in mind that's going to be a philosophy throughout this, just a key principle. And it's something that's quite different from the past. So we're going from just like informing to really making it a collaborative dialogue. So these are the sort of the, roughly speaking, 8 steps that for all the different techniques that we've talked about in the past webinars, where we have looked, where we are doing community engagement, whether it's surveys or if it's focus groups, just putting together your whole plan. And really, you need to communicate scientific and technical information, which I'm going to say S&T, by the way, pretty much at every single step of this process. And it's important for a number of reasons. So first, we're asking a lot of communities these days, and part of it is to actually take personal action. I mean, we saw this a lot during the pandemic, like wearing a mask. There's things now related to climate in terms of actions people take there. On an energy standpoint, trying to think about like how we use our energy, what decisions we make when we say buy a vehicle or decide, to like reduce our thermostat. So because we're asking people to do things, it's really important that we recognize that they are partners in the implementation of what comes out of scientific and technical information. And it's no good for scientists and engineers and the health professionals just talk to themselves. The whole goal is to have the public understand what it is that we're talking about so they can make the best decisions, regardless of what they might be. Now, they're going to take other factors into account besides science and technology, but we want to make sure that at least that element, they understand how it should contribute to their process. And if you have a misstep in communication, it can derail well-intentioned programs. A good example of this is at the beginning of the pandemic, there's been studies by the National Academy of Science and Engineering Medicine, for example, that talked about the challenges that occurred that were related to scientific communication and how information was conveyed, creating a lot of resentment by some populations, which led to making it harder to implement some of the programs. And of course, you really want to have clarity, credibility, and cultural alignment with whatever population that you're working with. And that, again, is going to vary a great deal, not just politically, but lots of other different factors in terms of what is considered to be acceptable or not acceptable in a particular culture.
Oh, Debbie, you are mute.
Oh, I must hit the wrong button there. Okay, so I was saying the challenge with jargon that I find when I work with people is that they don't really realize they're saying jargon. And this happens, like even to me. We use these terms and things like that so often, and we say, "Oh, I'm not using jargon," but then you really are, and it can be very alienating to people as they're trying to understand what it is you're saying. They took the time to listen to you, and now they can't understand what you're saying. If you don't have context, then it can create confusion and alarm. Sometimes if you do it as a one-way communication where you just kind of begin speaking on high and saying, oh, like giving a lecture, as opposed to an engagement, it can signal to them that you are disinterested in what it is that they have to say, that you are not recognizing the autonomy of communities. And if you misread community values because you make assumptions, then it can trigger backlash or apathy. And we all also know that right now we have a lot of there's a lot of distrust out there in institutions, in all kinds of institutions, not just government, but in universities, in just people who are in the commercial sector. There's a lot of distrust out there of some of our major institutions that in the past people would have had more trust in. So it means it's very, very important to be clear and open. And it's important to go back to what I was saying before, that scientific technical information is not the only factor in terms of how people make decisions. Today, these decisions are shaped as much by values as by facts. And you have to recognize that and make sure you honor that when you are engaging in this communication. So it's important because communication is important because you want to foster trust and transparency. Your goal is to enhance scientific literacy and empowerment, to drive innovation and relevance, facilitate two-way communication, which I'll talk about in a second, develop the capacity for civic engagement so people are willing and interested in being involved, and ultimately you want to solve real-world problems. So I just wanted to give one example on this innovation and relevance. So one of the studies I worked on, long ago, was looking at the impact of places like Hanford and Rocky Flats, which are former nuclear waste sites. And so it was a risk assessment study. And in this case, it's in Washington State. And the risk analyst were applying national assumptions to this community in Washington State. The challenge that occurred was the amount of fish consumption. So when the risk analysts did this work, they were assuming a relatively low consumption of fish because that's the American way across the United States. But in this community, because there were sort of the first Americans that were residing in the area, the indigenous communities there, their consumption of fish was much higher. And it was only through communicating with the people who were actually lived in that community that the analysts realized that they were on the wrong track with their analysis. They had made a false assumption because they didn't consider that community needs and what it was that how that community was different from other communities. And so that's something you want to always incorporate is, you're making a lot of assumptions when you're doing any sort of scientific technical analysis. Checking those with the community is one way for them to become engaged and to make what you do and what you communicate more relevant. So going back to two-way engagement, that sort of concept. So this is what's called the science deficit model. And this is the way that we sort of learn in school, or like the way I'm talking now, for example, is I'm speaking and it's just like a one-way communication. I'm giving you so knowledge, you're supposed to listen to what I say, and a light bulb's going to go above your head and say, oh, Debbie, you are so right. What I was doing this way is like wrong, right? It's the way we learn in classroom and teaching settings, whatever they might be, at all levels of sort of formal education. But in community engagement, that's not what you're doing. You don't want it to be a one-way model where the knowledge is coming only from the scientist and it's not coming from the community in which you're engaging. So one is so there's two kind of ways to approach it, and one way is to have just provide among the citizens like the opportunity to sort of say something, to give feedback on whatever that knowledge is. But a better way is the co-production of knowledge, where it's not just a dialogue about what the scientist has done, but you are instead working together, like that example I mentioned earlier, on whatever the societal issue is of concern, the focus of whatever the public policy is. So this is an example of Flint, Michigan. Now, I imagine most of you know about Flint, Michigan, but it has sort of been a while. So this is just sort of a brief overview. So the challenge that occurred during that time was that their engineers and officials insisted the water met federal standards. What occurred was basically the Flint, Michigan had relied on water from, I think it was the city of Detroit, and then they were going to switch to another source, a new source of water. But in between, they had something where they got water from the river. And there were concerns from the residents about the water. And in fact, even one of the major companies in the area said that this water is not sufficient quality for us to use in our manufacturing process. But because the scientists dismissed the concerns of the residents, there was a breakdown in trust. It became a big national scandal. There were also long-term health consequences that related to Legionnaire's disease, and the communication itself that led to this. It was a very defensive. It was opaque. It was very technical. And so what went wrong in that situation was the failure to listen to community concerns, that technical reassurances are prioritized over transparency, and then there was no clear visual explanation of the water contamination or risks. So some of you might even be from Michigan and know more about this than I do. But I'm going to show this video primarily because I want you to see how internally things can go wrong among all these different players. I have no idea how accurate this video is, but I think I've seen similar situations frequently enough in the past that I could certainly, imagine that it is occurring. So I'm going to go ahead and start this now.
Who knew what when? Email records show when top state government officials knew about the Flint water crisis. October 1st, 2014. Governor Rick Snyder receives a detailed briefing paper from DEQ about boil water advisories in Flint and problems with controlling bacteria in water. October 14th. Valerie Brader sends an email to Michael Godola, Dennis Muchmore, Beth Clement, and Jared Agan, raising concerns about Flint water after General Motors announces Flint River water is too corrosive for its manufacturing needs. Brader writes, "I see this as an urgent matter to fix, urging Flint be switched back to Detroit water." Godola agrees the water source should be switched back to Detroit ASAP before this thing gets too far out of control. Muchmore forwards Brader's email to Thomas Saxton and Wayne Workman and asks them, "Can you guys step into this?" October 2014. After Brader's October 14th email raising concerns about Flint River water, Richard Baird talks to Brader and Darnell Early. Early says the water problem can be solved, and it would be too cost prohibitive to switch back to Detroit water, according to the Flint Water Advisory Task Force. January 2015. Dan Wyatt and Nick Lyon both become aware of a Legionnaire's disease outbreak in Genesee County and its potential link to Flint River water. January 28th. Dick Posthumus hosts a meeting of officials from the governor's office, Treasury, City of Flint, and others to discuss Flint water. Among those invited are Clement, Saxton, Harvey Hollins, and much more. January 30th. Brad Werfel sends an email to Dave Murray saying he doesn't want Wyatt, quote, to say publicly that the water in Flint is safe until we get the results of some county health department epidemiological trace work back on 42 cases of Legionnaire's disease in Genesee County since last May, end quote. February 1st. Snyder receives a detailed memo about the Flint water situation from Murray in advance of a grant announcement to improve Flint's water system. The memo does not mention Legionnaires. March 2nd. Muchmore emails Clement and Hollins, "I have become increasingly concerned about the situation in Flint and the lack of empathy for the residents. Muchmore suggests buying bottled water for residents." Saxton, Baird, Agan, Brad Werfel, Sarah Werfel, Wyatt, and Workman are looped into email conversation, which morphs into an idea to deliver tap-mounted water filters to Flint. March 6th. As part of a written daily briefing to Snyder, Sarah Werfel writes, "Community activists are continuing to raise public concerns about the quality of Flint water, and the talk has grown uglier." March 13th. Brad Werfel sends an email to Sarah Werfel, Agan, and Hollins detailing the Legionnaire's disease outbreak, and says Genesee County Health Director Jim Henry is claiming Flint River water is to blame. Agan later says that he never opened the email. April 29th. Hollins gives Snyder a briefing memo on the city of Flint, which includes a section on Flint water, and concludes Flint cannot afford to switch back to Detroit water. Hollins doesn't tell Snyder about the possible link between Legionnaires and Flint water. He later tells MLive, "I assumed others would inform the governor, but looking back now, it is clear that was not the case." Summer 2015. Snyder has said that it was in the summer of 2015 that he first heard reports from staff that outside parties were testing for lead in Flint's water, and that his staff had met with citizens who had raised concerns about the possibility that lead was getting in the water in Flint. July 7th. Brad Werfel is contacted by an ACLU reporter who has a copy of an internal EPA memo outlining concerns of systemic lead contamination in Flint. Werfel declines to comment. 6 days later, Werfel tells Michigan Radio, "Anyone who is concerned about lead in the drinking water in Flint can relax." July 22nd. Muchmore and Hollins meet with concerned Flint residents who say 80 water tests show high lead levels. Muchmore sends an email to Wyatt and Lyon saying Flint residents are concerned about lead in their water and asks Wyatt and Lyon to personally take a look at this. August 27th. Virginia Tech professor Mark Edwards starts posting results online showing high lead levels in Flint water. In response, Brad Werfel says Flint drinking water meets state and federal safe drinking water standards. September 3rd. Saxton emails Muchmore and two others, James Redford and Workman, a description of the cost to reconnect to Detroit water, and ends by saying, "I assume/hope no one is still seriously considering that option." September 8th. Brad Werfel tells Flint Journal reporter that Edwards could be seen as fanning political flames irresponsibly. Residents of Flint concerned about the health of their community don't need more of that. September 24th. After pediatrician Dr. Mona Hanna-Attisha announces elevated lead levels in Flint children, Murray issues a public statement saying that changing the water source would not address the water issues in Flint. October 1st. This is the date Snyder has said he first received confirmation from our experts that there was a problem with lead in water. January 13th, 2016. Snyder announces at a press conference a potential connection between a deadly outbreak of Legionnaire's disease and Flint water, dating back to 2014. The governor says he was only made aware of the issue a few days before the announcement. January 15th. During a taping of the public television program Off the Record, Muchmore says he didn't learn about the outbreak of Legionnaire's disease and the potential connection to the Flint River until after Snyder did. Snyder has apologized repeatedly for the crisis, and he has vowed to fix Flint. Yet it's never been fully explained how crucial information didn't reach the governor, and why the Snyder administration allowed the people of Flint to use undrinkable water for so long. Who knew what when?
Oop, there we go. So hopefully you can sort of see some of the challenges. And as I go through the rest of this presentation and go through these tips, you're going to see why these occur. Why they're there is, this, came over time, just to really one of the most major issues, regarding the communicating with the public, when they have a concern. But it could also be over everyday community engagement. It all has the same things to it, where you don't have empathy necessarily, you're not listening to what people are saying. All those same principles are there. So let me gonna go into some of the tips for how to do something like this better. So some of these the principles are clarity. So clarity without condescension. In other words, using plain language without oversimplifying. Relevance over abstraction. Connect the science to the lived experience of the community with whom you're interacting. And be transparent. Don't make statements like, well, the science says this, so it has to be right. Anybody who works in science and technology knows that science isn't perfect. In fact, the whole concept is that science iterates and improves over time. So it's important to be open about the limitations, the uncertainties, the trade-offs, and you want a dialogue, not a monologue. So you want to design opportunities that are part of your community engagement. Again, at each part of that engagement, from the very beginning to the very end and even afterwards, to give opportunities for questions and local insight related to the scientific and technical information that's being presented. So some of the tools that work are data visualizations, interactive formats. Sometimes these days, particularly, you'll see some sort of mobile app or game. Storytelling, that's really always a key. That's always the most impactful communication, is storytelling, and thinking about materials that are multilingual for people who are at different literacy levels. So here, we're going to go into a little bit more in depth on some of these. So here we go. Principle one here, or tip one, is understanding your audience and using plain language, visuals, and analogy. So I have sort of before and after here. So before, you might say PM 2.5 particulate matter. I was trained in air pollution engineering. I know what that is, but for the average person, they have no idea what 2.5 is or particulate matter. So you want to say something like tiny air particles that can affect our breathing. And so you're relating it to like why they should care, not just saying PM 2.5, assuming knowledge, but saying, okay, this is things that might affect us. Instead of saying something like, the project will utilize a stochastic modeling approach to optimize hydrological parameters. I've seen that some sentence like that many a time. Something like, instead, like, we'll use a computer model to help predict how water will flow in your neighborhood. Again, notice where it says in your neighborhood, right? So you're talking about them, not keeping it very general. And instead of a dense table of numbers and expecting the audience to interpret them, have a simple map or infographic that, for example, highlights flood-prone areas and proposed solutions. So per previous request, I am for each of these tips, I have prompts that you can use. And I do think that when it comes to communication, this is where tools like ChatGPT really can help. It's something where, like, I use it all the time because, again, I don't really realize lots of times how much, say, jargon that I'm saying, right? Because to me, it's something that I use every day, that people interact with, they use it every day. And so you might have several goals here. So the first one is to build a profile of your audience. And this is important because, oftentimes in these community engagements, you're speaking to very different audiences. Sometimes You might be speaking to somebody like, say, at a local church or community group. Sometimes you're speaking to maybe an advisory board. So each audience is going to require different levels of knowledge and depth. So this is one of the prompts you can use. The second thing is to think about sort of the needs and barriers. So thinking about their motivations, the challenges they have, any sort of barriers they might have in that technical information. So that's where the second prompt helps. And then the third one is tailoring the message, right? So you're just kind of taking what you do. And so you're putting together the audience description that you figured out, plus whatever it is you say. And then, I generally would put both into ChatGPT and say, okay, take what I'm saying and relate it to this audience. Like right now, I'm working on a project related to manufacturing and AI data centers, right? So when I'm working in this case, primarily in Perplexity, because that at the moment is my favorite engine because I can see the references, I will take what I wrote. So it's my original content. I will put it in there and I'll say, okay, make this content relevant to manufacturers, and it will make changes and additions and so forth. And I will look over those and say, do I agree with them or don't agree with them? But it always helps me improve the quality of my writing for a particular audience. And, I'm giving a webinar to them just like in a couple of weeks. So it's really important that I understand that when I'm communicating with them about this topic. Okay, another really important principle that often is not discussed when scientists, engineers are talking, and health professionals, is the importance of uncertainty. So, like I said before, there, we know that there's uncertainty in all scientific activities. There's no reason to hide that, from your audience, your community, just because you think they might not do what it is that you want them to do because of that uncertainty. You just need to be transparent and clear as to what it is. So saying something like this solution will definitely solve the flooding problem is not very helpful because we don't really know that. I will tell you, for any public policy, there's so much uncertainty just in the world as a whole that something that might be like as perfect as you could get today might not be a year from now because, oh my goodness, the presidential administration has changed. So another way to say it is, based on our current data, this approach should reduce flooding, but we'll keep monitoring it to see how well it works. Then another thing is to use, like analogies. So here's an example of an analogy that does not work very well because of it has too much certainty in it. So testing our water is like checking one spot in a swimming pool and assuming the whole pool is the same. So we know exactly what's going on everywhere. Instead, a better way to say it would be testing water is like checking a few spots in a big swimming pool. We get a good idea, but there's always a chance something different is happening elsewhere. So we should keep on checking and sharing what we find. So here are again some prompts. One is sort of explaining like the uncertainty, like how you do that, visualizing the uncertainty, and communicating what's known and what's unknown. I think this last one is particularly important. You really say, okay, well, this is, what we know. This is where we have, some sort of quantitative data. But oftentimes in the public policy world, we don't know. We don't have all the data, particularly perfect data. So oftentimes, like I might be using, like if I'm doing analysis in West Virginia, there's no West Virginia data. So I get as close as I can get. So I'm using Pennsylvania data. So definitely there are differences, in the states are right next to each other. I'm just an hour away, basically, from West Virginia, from where I am here in Pittsburgh. But it doesn't mean that they're the same. And so as long as you're honest about that and upfront, then your audience is going to be willing to accept that. So there's no need to hide that from them. So a third tip is relating information to community concerns. So you don't want to focus solely on technical specifications without addressing how the project impacts daily life. So a better way to say it would be, say, this new tap water system will help ensure, this new water system will help ensure your tap water stays safe during reign. So now that I look at this, I'm thinking, I don't know, it's a little bit, maybe a little bit too strong. So the other example is it's a little bit too arrogant, saying our data is more accurate than your observations. So you can imagine, interacting with a community member and saying that, we know more than you do. And instead saying your experience with flooding help us understand where our models might need adjustment. Can you tell us more about what you've seen? And that again is that sort of bi-directional discussion, right? These are the assumptions that we have, but you who've lived here for all these years, you know more than we do, particularly if you're from outside the community. Let's discuss. And some examples, might be for prompts, an impact explainer, just thinking about ways you can relate this to the local community, integrating the community into your story, talking about the benefits and risk, using a real or hypothetical story of a local resident, and then just some sort of analogy that you can do where you try to connect it to something that people are used to. I myself am not a fan of sports analogies because only people who watch those sports understand them. But something more general like a swimming pool or something, I think, works a lot better. Okay, so the fourth tip is encouraging questions and feedback, and providing handouts with key takeaways. So when you're at a meeting or you're doing whether it's a virtual event or a public event, you always want to have something where they go away with feeling that any questions they have been answered, and that there's something that they can refer to for more information. Maybe they're going to talk to somebody about it later, and they don't really kind of remember everything that you had. So it would not be good to say, give a lecture and then with thanks, that's it. Thank you for listening without inviting questions. Or what I see most often happens is and you'll see this happen a lot in policy circles where people intentionally talk so long that there's no time for questions. And that is a way of avoiding questions by just not leaving time for questions. So you want to make sure you have time for that in whatever the agenda is for the event, or the time frame you give when you send something for public comment. So you might instead say, what questions do you have about how this might affect your neighborhood? Your input helps us improve our plan. So you're making them part of the process. And instead of not providing handouts, instead do like one-page summaries, have the key points, the graphics, contact information. So there's somebody they can reach out to for more information. So here is three other things you can do with AI. Have an open-ended Q&A creator. So questions that you can ask community members based on whatever your talk is on. Ask them something to draft a closing statement to make it clear that you're interested in their thoughts and questions. And then you can also take a document. This is something I do fairly often these days. If I write something that is like right now for what I'm doing, and it's like 25, 30 pages, I will send it in and I'll ask one of the Jen and I tools to create an executive summary or a set of bullets. And I'll give it some limits, like depending on the audience, it might just be one slide, that's at the end, or maybe it's more a summary that's more like a paragraph or two, whatever is appropriate for that context, and see what it produces. So sometimes I'll even ask it for several options or send it through several different engines. So I'll send it sometimes, like these days, through Gemini, which is the Google version of this, ChatGPT, Perplexity, Claude, just kind of see which one I like, which one I think communicates the messages the best. Okay, so the last tip here is to demonstrate empathy and feedback. So rather than, you almost heard this exact statement in the thing that the Flint example, which is our tests show the water meets all safety standards. There's nothing to worry about, so we'll move on. Right? So an alternative would have been to say, we understand that many of you are worried about the safety of your drinking water, especially given the history of industrial activity nearby. Our latest tests show that the water currently meets safety standards. However, we recognize that standards don't always address every concern, and your health is our top priority. So some AI tools you can use here is to have your empathetic response rewriter. Again, take what you have written, ask it to, to make it more empathetic, to make sure that you acknowledge the emotions while still providing this accurate information. Have a good opening for the meeting to make it clear that you are interested, that you appreciate their time, that you really do want to hear what they have to say. And sometimes when you do have to have difficult news, then maybe a good prompt to use is to come up with ways of trying to deliver that difficult news as best you can. Okay, so now moving on to our last section here, which is resources and case studies. So I thought this was a pretty good guide. This is called Inclusive Communication for State and Local Governments, Making Written Communication Easy to Understand. And this is a before and after. So this program promotes efficient water use in homes and businesses nationwide by offering a simple way to make product purchasing decisions that conserve water without sacrificing quality or product performance. So you'll see here that the grade level for this is 18.9, which really amazes me because it doesn't seem that high to me, but I guess it is. So they use a tool called Hemingway, which I'll show you next, to improve this and make it more accessible to more audiences. So this program helps you find products that will save water. You can decide which products are best for your home or business. You can help the earth and enjoy good water quality. So that reduces the content of what you're trying to say here in the top to grade level 5. Like I said, in my case, I could certainly imagine writing a sentence like that top one. And that's why I need help to try to figure out how to say what it is I need to say and make it clearer and more useful to my audience. So this is the Hemingway app. And I think the key here is up in the upper right here where it says readability. And you'll see here it says like grade 8. And then it gives you an analysis of how hard it is to read particular sentences. So some of this tool is free, some of it's not free. But like you'll see here that this is the one in red. If you see a red highlight, your sentence is so dense and complicated that your reader will get lost trying to follow its meandering, convoluted logic. Try editing the sentence to remove the red highlight. Okay, so I definitely fall into this category again. I write a lot of stuff for different audiences, and it is definitely a challenge, that I have to stop myself because I'm trying to get so much information out there that I make things more complicated. And even though I know that it's much better to break it up into smaller portions. And I will even say to people that I'm teaching, hey, do you realize that you have like 30 words in that sentence? And then you think, oh, wow, I do have 30 words. That's a lot of words. But you just don't realize it as you're writing it because you're so focused on communicating whatever it is that you're trying to say. So here's an example of what I consider to be a good one. So the reason why it's good, this is from the Climate Ready Boston initiative, is that it presents complex climate projections through visual storytelling, has neighborhood maps, they had interactive workshops. They prioritize co-creating with the community members on flood resilience planning, and then they translated materials and adapted it for different literacy levels. So and I'm going to show you some graphics next that illustrate this localized data with community relevance, the collaborative tone, and the different ways that they got across the message. So first, here's an example of how they did this. This is on a video, but you can imagine doing something similar like live, or you might actually want to produce a video like this.
One of the major catalysts for Climate Ready Boston was actually a major storm that hit the city of New York. It hit the city of New York, which is a couple hundred miles southwest of us, and even though it was a couple of hundred miles southwest, really we think of it as just a few hours off from having a similar impact here in our city. I'm Chris Osgood. I'm the director of the City of Boston's Office of Climate Resilience. In January of 2018 and then in March of 2018, we had two very significant coastal storm events, both of which caused inundation not only in downtown Boston, but in areas of South Boston, East Boston, and across our communities. And that was really a huge moment for us to go from planning to really implementing a set of demonstration projects across our waterfront.
I'm Kat McCandless. I'm a Senior Climate Resilience Project Manager with the City of Boston's Office of Climate Resilience, and I mostly work on coastal resilience projects. The core of coastal resilience work in the city and really everywhere is to really elevate the existing ground plane above the base flood elevation to prevent flooding in the future from overtopping these spaces. So the park in the North End is really noteworthy because it elevated the existing seawall and placed publicly accessible walkways on top of that elevated seawall. And in addition to that, to integrate additional flood protection into the public realm, the project installed a series of benches that mask a seawall that is above ground so that when it's flooding, that's an extra layer of redundancy to keep water out of the park. But during a sunny day, people are able to sit on that bench and look out at the harbor and have no idea that what they're sitting on is a coastal resilience project. Something to notice about Piers Park is that that project integrated a berm into the back edge of the park. So when you're walking around through the pathways in the park, you may not notice that the adjustment in elevation is masking a berm that is intentionally designed to keep waters out of the neighborhood behind the park.
All of this work really starts with understanding the risk, and the Massachusetts Coastal Flood Risk Model and the work of the Woods Hole Group has really helped ensure that we have a very good sense of what do we need to be building for at what timeline. And it's that work which underpins so much of the construction that we're doing now. We know where we need to be building, how high we need to be building, and what pace we need to be building to be able to protect our residents. So in all of our projects, we're looking to achieve three different objectives. First, and perhaps foremost, is to lower the risk of coastal flooding. We want to make sure that people and property are protected from some of the inundation events that are going to become more frequent in the years ahead. But we also want to make sure that those parks are beautiful, wonderful places to be when there aren't storms. We want to make sure that they are accessible and inviting. So we want to make sure that we are reducing risk and that we are increasing access and improving the public realm, as well as importantly actually continue to contribute to the quality of the harbor itself, improving the ecology of this place that we all love.
Okay, so you'll see that, I mean, they definitely use some jargon in that presentation, but they followed it with an explanation so that even if you didn't really know what that word was, like I think there was the word berm and plane and things like that, there was enough context that you could, figure out what it was that they meant, and then they related it and showed enough community members that you could see what was happening.
What are the major catalysts for?
So this is their report. And I'm going to just show some of the graphics here and, like why, at least I think that they're pretty good. So, and I should say I've been working on climate change. My very first study was on climate change back when I was in my 20s. So I've been working on it for a long, long time. And what I like about this one is that, sure, they are relating it to like the temperature that people care about. Like so often when I see climate change graphics, they are like in Celsius, and so people really don't really exactly know what they mean. They know it's going up, but they don't really have any notion what it is. So by here saying how many like days are over 90, how many days over 100, and then also having that uncertainty in here, right? That's what these days are. That like the range of days from 20 to 40 or 25 to 90, they're getting across that, hey, this is something that we can be concerned about. And they're putting it in a context so people can understand, like, oh, like how many days do we have this summer that are over 90 degrees? I know here in Pittsburgh, we've had a lot more days over 90 degrees this summer than than in the past. And it's really important to contextualize it. So, where my family lives, which is in Central Texas and San Antonio, pretty much almost every day in San Antonio is over 100 degrees, right? So this, they wouldn't necessarily think this was a big deal because that's what they have all the time. And that's why it's really important to relate it, because in cities like Boston and Pittsburgh and Seattle, we're not used to having days over 90 degrees. As you can see, this like in 1990 down there was like very few. And all of a sudden, it's changing an awful lot. So it's something that people can understand, things that regular people talk about. Similar here, this is also good in sort of showing the degree of uncertainty by having this medium emission scenario and the high emission scenario. And then here they were talking about buildings. So that's the other thing I don't really see very often is like when people talk about flooding, they might say, oh, it's like a couple of inches or something above what it is. But in this case, not only are they talking about overall the number of buildings that have increased that are exposed to frequent stormwater flooding, but they're also saying the kind of buildings, right? And you'll see here, it's a large number, looks like 70% that are residential. And so that relates it much more to the people who are talking about it. I think, oh, wow, it's not just going to affect like, oh, the high-rise buildings, whatever, downtown. It's affecting people who actually, live in homes. And then this is also another good way, I think, to explain it is they're talking about the citywide population that is exposed to it. And so you'll see again, they have variations here, based on uncertainty for the likelihood of flooding and how much of the population is exposed. And then in terms of adapting to climate change, so this is basically what was talked about in the video, which is what actions are people taking. So they're just not putting a list, like a bulleted list on a slide deck or something like that to say what is they're doing. They're visually showing like where it will be throughout the city, and using local landmarks that I presume if you were a Bostonian, you would know a great deal about. In fact, I will be in Boston in about a month. Another thing that they did, which I thought was good, was they focused on neighborhoods. So in the end, that's, like in big cities, people live not just in like, say, the city of Boston, but in neighborhoods within the city of Boston. So they have these like this visualization here of a map so people can really get a better understanding of, when it's talking about the residences and so forth that are impacted, where the adaptation activities will be, the vulnerability, people can look at this map to understand where it is that they are within the concerns that are related to climate change. So here's my sort of final thoughts. So first, scientific tech information is more than data, it's a public good. So we always have to keep in mind that the public, the taxpayers, are paying, scientists, engineers, and health professionals to create, collect data, analyze, develop information. And it's a public good. In other words, they are paying us to do what it is that we do. And so when we think about it, it's not like our information. It's in terms of like being the scientific and technical community's information. It's everyone's information. It's a public good. We share the ownership of that information, and so the discussion about it should go both ways in terms of what we collect, how we analyze it, what questions we answer through that analysis, and how it's communicated in a way that makes sense for the answers I need as a citizen to make decisions. And when the communities are treated as partners, it becomes actual knowledge, something where they can talk about it. Because, oftentimes, of course, there's only maybe one person, but that one person, talks to their friends, their neighbors, their colleagues. And, they are like what I call carrier pigeons. They go and they help spread the word, right? So they become our partners in communicating that information. And good engagement isn't just about listening and about explaining, it's about listening and learning and co-creating. So you really want to be in active listener mode when you're doing communication related to scientific information. You're not telling people things. You're saying, okay, this is what we have found. What would you like to know? What information do you have to share with me? Not just what information I have to share with you. And then lastly, always answer whenever you are developing your presentation. It's sort of a key principle. Just kind of put this sort of hat on. Always focus on the questions that the audience has. What does this mean for me and those whom I care about? In the end, that's why I'm there. That's why I am engaging in whatever this community activity is. It's because I want to understand how it's going to impact me. So with that, I will just, for those of you who haven't been here before, I also have a new newsletter. So I'm very active on LinkedIn. So if you'd like to connect with me there, then you'll hear about other presentations that I'm doing that are out there in the world. And then you'll see here that I have this Inform and Influence newsletter, which is for opinions. And then I have this new like mini workshop with videos, which is Science, Technology, Policy Analysis 101, which is based on my book. If you want to have like a less than 5-minute video for each chapter of my book, it's a way to get the whole thing done quickly. And then I also am trying to help people find jobs for the many people in the scientific tech community who have been laid off. So I have a list of job openings that comes out each week. And I also have this new newsletter that I just started yesterday, which is S&T Policy Job Advice. So with that, I am happy to answer any questions that you have. And also, if anybody has experiences they'd like to share in terms of what worked and didn't work, and related to scientific tech communication, I would be happy to hear it.